I am going to introduce our next speaker. Dan Russell is Google's Über tech lead for search quality and user happiness in Mountain View. Dan.
So I want you to think about credibility and truth. And what's the relationship? Because this is kind of what we're talking about today. What do we know is true? How do we know it? And what do we think of as credible resources? So I want to show you my favorite credible resource, which is my mom. And my mom is incredibly credible about a lot of things. Raising family, raising kids, I would argue. Music, lots of things. Quantum mechanics, not so much. What that tells me, though, is that even very credible sources have their limits. There are things you expect them to do and to know and to not. One of the things I love about my mom, though, is when I ask her a question and she doesn't know the answer, or she gives me erroneous information, she will say she's wrong later. But she'll say she's wrong. And that's an important signal. Because some resources, like say the New York Times here, publish every day their corrections. We got it wrong yesterday. We fixed it today. We got it wrong last week. We fix it tomorrow. That's an important signal because there are some websites you know about that never have an error. You should be very suspicious about these websites. So an important thing I want you to take away from this, though, is that as important as errors are, as a signal of credibility, it's important to also realize that credibility is not the same. It's not equal to truth. Credibility is a subjective measure. It's what you impute to the source. So in particular, your assessment of credibility changes and is variable by the topic, by the time, by the source, and so on. Importantly, it's very much dependent upon your point of view, hence the cartoon in the lower left. Your point of view on the subject may deeply influence your notion of what's accurate, what's truthful, and what's credible. So I have a wonderful, wonderful example. You might think, for example, that the Nobel Prize is a signal of truth and credibility. But let me introduce you to Julius Wagner Jauregg. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1927 for his discovery of the groundbreaking therapeutic value of malaria inoculation in the treatment of syphilis. Yes, he discovered that people who have syphilis, when they get malaria, get better. So he proposed fixing people who have syphilis by giving them malaria. Is that a good idea? I don't know. The thing about it is it's true. People who have syphilis who get malaria often get better. It's a bad idea, but they do get better. So he discovered a true thing that's just not very credible today. There's a lot of Nobel Prizes. If you go back in time, you think, oh, wait a second, that was crazy. This is one. We have a lot of common beliefs in our parlance today that we think of. For example, I remember going to library classes back in the day and being told that .com sites are more credible than .org sites. And .net sites are more credible than .com sites and .info, et cetera, right? Now, there's a problem with this. There's a big problem with this. For example, if you go to GoDaddy, which is a place that sells domain names, and you say League of Women Voters, you can buy leagueofwomenvoters.com for $12. Is it a credible site? Who knows? Even worse, you can buy leagueofwomenvoters.org, leagueofwomenvoters.us, leagueofwomenvoters.net, etc. You see where I'm going with this? The price goes down as you go farther down the page. For $4, you can buy leagueofwomenvoters.live. And you can put whatever you want on it. You see the problem? We do live in a zero-time publishing cycle. I can put anything out, and I can put it on sites that look credible. Beware. So I really like what Sarah and Renee have been saying. We have to not only be aware of these things, be aware of our media diet, and be aware of the things we're taking in, but you have to be a little bit critical. So I want to be clear. By credibility, I want to say it's stuff you find believable. Truth doesn't enter into it. It's separate. Authoritative means how much does this particular site or resource have a degree of officiality around it. Think about this. You can have an authoritative site that's not credible. You probably know some of those, right? Or informative, right? You can have a site that's not credible, not authoritative, but very informative. And likewise, you can have sites that are very useful, but not credible, not authoritative, but informative and useful. You see, these are all different properties. We should not confuse them. And what about truth? That's a hard topic. Okay? Here's an example. You recognize this? Benjamin Franklin, right? You probably have him in your pocket. Okay? Is this Benjamin Franklin, the American superstar inventor, or Benjamin Franklin, British traitor? Or is it Benjamin Franklin, purveyor of fake news? Because Benjamin Franklin wrote frankly overt fake news. He invented Indian atrocities on the settlers. He totally made this up out of whole cloth and published it. So, who's believable here? It becomes a real issue when we start living and thinking about the world that we live in now, which has a lot of technology to support the creation of interesting, difficult to parse images. So you might have seen the Dove evolution videos, which has a picture of a young woman who, through the magic of makeup and Photoshop, becomes an image that you can put on a poster, you can put on a billboard, you can put into the pages of a magazine to sell products. Which is true in those images? Well, they're both true, right? Now, here's a little test for you. Here are a set of images. Some of these are actual pictures with a camera. Some of these are computer generated. Go ahead, look at them for a second. Pick one that you think is a real image and pick one that you think is computer generated. Okay, and I'll give you the answer. Okay, you got them? Now look, the red ones are real pictures. Anybody get it wrong? Yes, exactly my point, okay? So I particularly like the guy down there in the bottom row, the computer-generated impish-looking man. Right, I thought it was a live picture. It's not. Let me give you my very favorite illustration of this, of the problems we're facing now as technology advances. Do you see the problem here? Now, if you go in and look at the frames, you can actually tell this is all fake, right? This has been edited to make the Holy Father doing a very, cheesy magic trick. The problem is this technology is getting better. In 5 years, I'm not going to be able to tell whether that's fake or real. This is happening in photos with Photoshop. It's happening with audio. It's happening with video, like you see here. This is a really interesting problem for us. But let's think about the world we live in right now. Suppose you're a 6th grade student and you do a query like, I want to find out about all the explorers. You type that in. Well, this takes you to this result, which looks like a wonderful web page. It's a great site, all the explorers. But when you start reading carefully, you learn that Christopher Columbus was born in 1951 in Sydney, Australia. So every kid in the United States will go, wait a second. But suppose they were looking for the explorer Jacques Cartier. They might not pick up on this little fact that he explored theoretically with Henry Hudson, Lewis and Clark, and John Glenn. Or that in 1535, he took the 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria back, the 3rd of which was completely stocked with hundreds of top quality watches. See, if you're in the 6th grade and you haven't heard about Jacques Cartier, the actual explorer, and you read this, you go, yeah, that sounds good, right? So think about what this means for us. How do we determine that this is actually a hoax? Because when you look at pictures like that, you go, yeah, I can generate that on a computer. You've seen Star Wars. You know we can make this. And it gets a little bit more complicated when you do a query like this. You read a story, say, about UFOs coming from Saturn. So you do a query, Saturn, UFO, NASA, and you get remarkable results. How do you start to discriminate fantasy from fact, credible resources from non-authoritative resources. I think Abraham Lincoln said this best when he said, "The problem with quotes on the internet is that they're hard to verify." It's true, right? So we have to realize that this kind of thing is actually deeply embedded in our culture. We all know about emoticons, we know the language of the internet and so on. So when you go to a website, a question answering website, and you see a question like this: is it true that Rosa Parks would have moved to the back of the bus, but she was listening to her iPod? And the best answer chosen by the asker is, yeah, it's true. What went wrong here? What went wrong is that the asker did not understand what that symbol means. You're all literate people. You know that that's the universal emoticon for sarcastic reply. That's the tongue sticking out. I'm pulling your leg is what that means. And the asker's rating is great. 5 stars, I'll put that in my report. I trust you have the nicest avatar. The quality of one's avatar, this is a big tip. The quality of one's avatar is not a basis on assessing the credibility of a result. Okay? We also live in a time when knowledge itself is changing. Now, you may not think about this because you think of things like the Aral Sea as being a constant in our universe. But in fact, the Aral Sea is now a giant freshwater pond. It's not even particularly large. Or how about Zaire? Remember Zaire? Used to be a country in Africa. It's not anymore. How about junk DNA? You see where I'm going with this? Molecular biology, geopolitics, the fundamentals of things we think we know is true are changing. Junk DNA is now recognized as real DNA content. To make this worse, as we were just hearing, your community makes a big effort, makes a big impact on your assessment of these things. So does the aesthetics of the site you look at. And this is something that's intrinsic in us, and we can't not do it. So when you look at a website like this is RYT Hospital and Duane Medical Center, you think, yeah, I'd go there. They have cute babies. The website is wonderful. It will take your credit card. It's got a copyright notice. It's got all those usual marks of a credible site. It's only when you get to this page that you start to wonder. Male pregnancy therapies. Is this an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, or is it a real thing? Lots and lots of 6th graders in the United States have been tripped up by this website. This is part of the culture of the internet. We have spoof sites. There is no Pacific Northwest tree octopus, just so you know. That doesn't stop thousands of 6th graders from writing learned essays every fall about this animal. Or about DHMO, which is dihydrogen monoxide, which, as we all know, is a real threat to us. Wait. Dihydrogen, 2H10, 2H10. Oh yeah, it's water. Okay? The problem with this website, which was a spoof website, is it led a city in Southern California that shall remain unnamed to try to ban the importation of dihydrogen monoxide, which really pissed off the water department. So we live in a world where this kind of stuff is just normal. And making fake sharks in the middle of the streets of New Jersey during Superstorm Sandy is an entertainment for somebody who loves to do that. It's not hard to figure this one out is fake, because when you go to the guy's Facebook page, he says, my hobby is making fakes. That's not hard, right? He admits it. So I think Hemingway actually has it right when he said every man should have a built-in crap detector. And furthermore, this is something we need to teach. It's not intuitive in all of us how to do this. So let me give you a couple quick tools and strategies for doing this. First big one, please, before you post that crazy thing, or before you repost that insane message you got from your mother-in-law, do one more search. Search for sharks in New Jersey during Sandy, and you'll find quickly it's a hoax. One more search often will give you insight and will stop you from having egg on your face. Think about doing this kind of background analysis by looking at who the author is. It's not hard to do this, but what makes this author an expert? Are they just a bot that's repeating some nonsense it picked up? Or, in the case of the UFOs from Saturn, do they show their badge in the lower left corner to give it a clue about what their inclination is? They really want to find aliens. They put a badge of an alien in their website. Check the website itself for background information. It's not hard to see who the authors are and see what other articles they've written. Check the About page. Check the web address. For example, if you heard a story that, for example, that the World Trade Organization, WTO, is instituting a formalized slavery market in Africa, your spidey sense should go, what? And you should say, wait a second, I'm going to do a search, and you'll find this website looks like that. It says, oh my gosh, they really are setting up a slavery site. Is that true? Well, if you check the title of the page, it says WTO, World Trade Organization, GATT, Global Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Wow, that must be right. But look at the URL there, www.gat.org. Go check that one out, and you discover that's the website of a group called the Yes Men. The Yes Men on their homepage say, we do international hoaxes. Again, not hard to figure this out. So before you get outraged, check, right? Before you get really upset and pissed off about something, do the obvious search first. You want to do these sort of obvious quality checks, and there's a lot of resources online that help you figure out, for example, using double quotes to find the author's name and all these tricks you can do. You want to check the data quality. For example, consider, what would prove this outrageous thing I'm reading to be wrong? How would you answer that question? For example, you can ask a terrible question like, is the average length of an octopus 18 inches? That's leading the jury. Don't ask questions like that. There are bad questions, and that's one. Avoid confirmation bias. So a better query would be just ask, what's the average length of an octopus? So when you're doing these kinds of researches, you want to look for bibliographies, citations, all that kind of stuff. Check the news sites to see what's background, but also use common sense. I know, that's asking a lot. But look, if somebody tells you that's a picture of the United States from a satellite during the Great Northeast blackout of 2003, you would say, yeah, New York is gone. There really was a power blackout then, but wait a second. You should be very suspicious of that picture because, why? No clouds. There are no clouds in North America, give me a break. Right, never happens. So look at these things skeptically, do the obvious searches, and there are a lot of search tools. Let me just show you one, and then we'll summarize here. If someone tells you this is the result of a terrible winter on Lake Michigan, shores right by Chicago, water's coming up and coating these cars with ice, terrible winter. But if you go to Google search and right-click on that image, you can search for that image. Did you know that? You can search for images, right? Incredibly handy tool. And you will find that this picture is not from Chicago, but in fact is from 2005 from Lake Geneva. I'm giving you a funny example here, but you can see lots of examples where people post pictures of riots or missile attacks in the Middle East and claim it's from last week in Lebanon or wherever, Syria, something. But if you actually do the Google search, you'll find out it's actually from 10 years ago, from another country. Recap. Please do one more search. Check these things. Check the expertise of the author and their motivations. Try to understand by looking at their website for the background, who owns the site, what are they doing, what's their motivation. Try to validate this data you see in stories, and be skeptical. Think critically, and use all these search tools we've got. So a quick promo here. I have an online course called PowerSearchingWithGoogle.com. It's 20 hours of exactly how to do this kind of thing. I have a blog where I post stuff every week, and that's the way you find it. I want to leave you with this last thought. Benjamin Franklin, Julius Wagner Jauregg, Abraham Lincoln, and my mom all agree, before you post or repost that message of dubious value and questionable parentage, please do one more search. Thank you very much.